8:45 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The guided missile cruiser, USS Monterey, was not alone in the narrow waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Something was moving directly beneath its keel. This was not a standard intercept. It was a violation of physical space that defied every tactical manual in the United States Navy. The crew on the bridge felt a vibration that did not come from their own twin gas turbine engines. They were being shadowed from below at a distance of less than 15 meters. The question was no longer if they were being watched. The question was how they could survive a collision that seemed inevitable. The sun sat low over the Iranian coastline. It turned the surface of the Gulf into a shimmering sheet of brass. Below that surface, the water was murky and crowded with the noise of global commerce. The Monterey was transiting the inbound shipping lane. It was a routine movement that had suddenly turned into a crisis. To the east, the jagged cliffs of the Mazandam Peninsula rose like teeth from the sea. The cruiser was boxed in by international law and shallow water. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere was frozen. The air conditioning hummed. Blue light from the consoles reflected off the sweat on the faces of the sonar technicians. The sonar supervisor spoke to the tactical action officer. "Sir, contact is designated Sierra 9-2. It is a Fateh-class submarine. It is maintaining station exactly 30 feet below our sonar dome." The tactical action officer responded. "Confirm depth. Are they drifting?" The supervisor shook his head. "Negative. They are matching our speed and heading perfectly. They are using our acoustic signature to hide. If we turn, they turn." The situation was a nightmare for the American commander. At this range, his weapons were useless. The Mark 46 torpedoes required a minimum distance to arm their warheads. The anti-submarine rockets were designed for targets miles away. The Monterey was a billion-dollar fortress with a hole in its floor. The Iranian submarine was so close that the cruiser's own hull acted as a shield for the intruder. 500 miles to the north, at the headquarters of the 5th Fleet in Bahrain, the signal reached the commanders. Analysts stared at the live data link. They saw one blue icon and one red icon overlapping so perfectly they appeared as a single dot on the screen. The Iranians had achieved the impossible. They had placed a lethal threat in a blind spot that should not exist. This was not a mistake by the submarine pilot. It was a calculated display of precision and nerves. On the bridge of the Monterey, the captain gripped the railing. He could feel the weight of the steel beneath him. He knew the Iranian commander was down there. He knew they were both listening to the same ocean. The sound of the Monterey's massive propellers would be deafening inside the submarine. One wrong move by either helm would lead to a disaster that could ignite the entire region. Steel would rend steel. Thousands of tons of water would rush into the engine rooms. The captain looked out at the horizon. He saw a line of commercial tankers waiting their turn to pass. He was responsible for their safety and the lives of 400 sailors. He needed to break the lock without starting a war. But the Iranian boat was like a shadow. It was attached to his ship by invisible chains of physics and intent. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 9:15 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The sonar room of the USS Monterey was a tomb of focused energy. Every sailor wore a headset. Every eye was locked on the waterfall displays of the ANSQS-53 sonar system. The sound coming through the hydrophones was a chaotic roar of cavitating water. The cruiser was moving at 12 knots. The massive propellers were churning the sea into a frothy mess. This noise was supposed to be a wall that protected the ship. Instead, it had become a cloak for the enemy. The sonar supervisor adjusted his gain settings. He was looking for a specific frequency, a needle in a haystack of white noise. He leaned into his microphone. "Bridge, sonar. I have a firm classification on Sierra 9-2. It is a Fateh-class coastal submarine. I am tracking a 7-bladed skewed propeller. Power plant is diesel-electric. They are currently running on battery." The tactical action officer responded immediately. "Confirm battery. Is there any snorkeling activity?" "Negative. They are fully submerged. Their signature is almost entirely masked by our own blade rate. They are using our hull as a physical barrier against our own active pings. We are blind to anything directly beneath us." 9:18 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Monterey. Commander Miller stood by the starboard bridge wing. He looked down at the water. He saw nothing but the green-blue wake of his ship. But he could feel it. A subtle change in the ship's buoyancy. A phantom weight. He wiped a bead of sweat from his temple. His breathing was slow and deliberate. The officer of the deck looked at him. "Sir, we are 5 miles from the Narrow. If we do not shake him now, we will be forced into the traffic separation scheme with a hostile contact under our keel. We will have zero room to maneuver." Miller did not look away from the ocean. "I am aware. If we increase speed, he might lose the suction and fall back. If we stop, he slams into our sonar dome. He has put us in a tactical box." The captain keyed the internal ship's circuit. "All stations, this is the captain. Maintain quiet. No sudden movements. We are in a close quarters standoff. Combat. Prepare a burst transmission to 5th Fleet. Advise them we are being physically shadowed." 9:21 in the morning. Inside the Iranian submarine, Fateh, the interior of the boat was a narrow pipe of green steel and exposed wiring. It smelled of ozone and unwashed bodies. Commander Reza stood behind the diving officer. He was a veteran of a dozen patrols in these waters. He knew the Monterey well. He had studied its acoustic profile for years. Now, he was so close he could hear the individual clatter of the American ship's auxiliary pumps. The diving officer looked up. His face was pale in the dim emergency lighting. "Commander, the Americans are slowing. 2 knots down." Reza placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Match them. Stay in their shadow. If they turn, we turn. We are the ghost in their machine." A junior officer spoke from the tiny radio station. "Sir, we are receiving a coded signal from the Coastal Command. They are asking for a status update." Reza did not take his eyes off the depth gauge. "Tell them the Americans are nervous. Tell them we are holding the line. We will not move until they acknowledge our presence in these waters." The submarine lurched slightly as it hit a thermal layer. The hull groaned under the pressure of the Monterey's displacement. For a second, the 2 vessels were displacement less than 10 meters apart. One mistake by the Iranian helmsman would send the sail of the submarine directly into the cruiser's fuel tanks. Reza smiled. It was a cold, professional expression. "They think they own the surface, but we own the silence." 9:25 in the morning. On the bridge of the Monterey, a sudden alarm began to wail. It was not the sonar. It was the surface search radar. The bridge watch officer shouted, "Captain, new contact. Bearing 045. High speed. It is an Iranian Boghammer fast attack craft. It is heading directly for our bow." The trap was closing. The threat was no longer just below. It was now dead ahead. 9:25 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The radar screen on the bridge of the USS Monterey showed a green blossom of light. It was moving at 40 knots. It was small, fast, erratic. The Boghammer fast attack craft was a common sight in these waters. Usually, they stayed at a distance to film the American ships, but this one was different. It was not circling. It was on a steady intercept course for the cruiser's bow. Commander Miller looked through his binoculars. He saw the white spray of the boat's wake. He saw the silhouette of a heavy machine gun mounted on the front. This was a classic pincer move. One threat was hidden beneath the water. The other was screaming across the surface. The captain turned to his tactical action officer. "The submarine is still there. If we maneuver to avoid the boat, we risk hitting the sub. If we stay on course, the boat might ram us." The tactical action officer responded, "Captain, the Boghammer is at 3,000 yards. They are ignoring our hails on the bridge-to-bridge radio." Miller grabbed the handset for the ship's loudspeaker. "This is the captain. All hands. Brace for shock. Small boat defense teams to the starboard rail. Do not fire unless ordered." 9:30 in the morning. Inside the Iranian submarine, Fateh. Commander Reza heard the high-pitched whine of the Boghammer's outboard engines. It was a familiar sound. It was the sound of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. His brothers were on the surface. They were doing their part to pressure the American giant. Reza looked at his sonar operator. "Give me the distance to the Monterey's rudder." The operator adjusted his headset. 10 meters. Sir, they are beginning to vibrate. I think they are preparing to increase speed. Reza gripped the handrail. They cannot run. If they go to full power, the cavitation will blind their own sonar. They would be sailing into the dark. We will stay exactly where we are. We are the anchor holding them in place. The Iranian commander felt a surge of pride. For decades, the Americans had dominated these waters with their massive ships and advanced technology. But today, a small crew in a coastal submarine was dictating the terms of the engagement. He could hear the heavy thud of the Monterey's hull moving through the water. It was the sound of a trapped animal. 9:34 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Monterey. The boghammer was now less than 1,000 yards away. It was so close that the sailors on the Monterey could see the orange life vests of the Iranian crew. The boat began to zigzag. It was trying to draw a reaction. It was trying to force the cruiser to make a sudden turn. The officer of the deck shouted, "Captain, they are crossing our bow. Distance 500 yards." Miller looked at the sonar repeater. The submarine Sierra 92 was still there. It was a ghost in the machine, a silent partner in this dangerous dance. The captain spoke into the internal comms. "Sonar, this is the captain. If we perform a crashback, if we reverse engines, what happens to the sub?" The sonar supervisor's voice was tense. "Sir, if we reverse, our propellers will be within 5 meters of their bow. We will likely shred their forward diving planes, or they will pierce our sonar dome. It will be a catastrophic collision for both vessels." The boghammer veered again. It was now heading directly for the cruiser's bridge wing. The Iranian sailors were standing on the deck of the small boat. They were holding cameras in one hand and rifles in the other. Miller realized the stakes had changed. This was no longer just a shadow game. The Iranians were testing his resolve. They wanted to see if the U.S. Navy would flinch. He keyed the radio to the 5th Fleet Command Center. "This is Monterey. We are being harassed by surface and subsurface elements simultaneously. Requesting immediate air support for situational awareness. We are holding course." But the margin of error is gone. The boghammer was now 300 yards away. It was a game of chicken played with thousands of tons of steel. 9:37 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The boghammer fast attack craft was now 200 yards from the Monterey's beam. It was carving a tight circle. The wake of the small boat sprayed onto the cruiser's lower decks. On the starboard side of the Monterey, the Phalanx close-in weapon system came to life. The white dome of the radar rotated with mechanical speed. The 6 barrels of the 20mm Gatling gun tracked the small boat with robotic precision. One command from the bridge would turn the Iranian craft into a cloud of splinters and fuel. Commander Miller watched the screen. His hand remained clear of the fire control trigger. "Do not engage. They are looking for a reaction. Maintain steady course." The officer of the deck looked at the radar plot. "Captain, the boat is dropping back. They are moving toward our stern. They are positioning themselves over the wake." Inside the Iranian submarine, Fateh, Commander Reza felt the shift in the water above him. The turbulence from the Monterey's massive screws was washing over his hull. It was like standing beneath a waterfall of steel and salt. The submarine groaned. The pressure was uneven. Reza spoke to his diving officer. "Keep us steady. Close the gap to 5 meters. I want to feel their hull." The diving officer's voice trembled. "Commander, the suction is increasing. If we move closer, the Monterey's propellers will pull us into the blades." Reza did not blink. "Match the pressure." "If we are not close enough to hear their hearts beating, bring us up 2 meters. 9:41 in the morning. The Combat Information Center. The Tactical Action Officer looked at Miller. "Sir, we have a problem with the rules of engagement. If the surface craft opens fire, we defend. But any kinetic shock on the surface will be amplified 10 times for the submarine below. If we drop a depth charge, or even fire a warning shot, we risk a hull breach on the Fateh." We could sink them by accident. Miller leaned over the tactical console. And if we sink them, we start a war. The Iranians know this. They are using their own safety as a weapon against us. They know we do not want to be the ones who fire the first shot. The sonar supervisor shouted from his station. Captain, contact Sierra 9-2 is moving. They are closing the vertical distance. 4 meters. 3 meters. 9:44 in the morning. The lower decks of the USS Monterey. A sound like a grinding saw tore through the silence of the auxiliary engine room. It was high-pitched, metal against metal. The ship shuddered. It was not a collision. It was a scrape. The top of the Iranian submarine's sail had brushed against the bottom of the Monterey's sonar dome on the bridge. The impact felt like a heavy thump against a curb. The entire 400-foot ship vibrated. The helmsman fought the wheel. Captain, I have a slight drag on the steering. Something is pinning us. Miller grabbed the radio. Sonar. Status. The supervisor's voice was frantic. They touched us. Sir, they are physically wedged between our sonar dome and the keel. They are using their diving planes to maintain upward pressure. They are literally riding our hull. 9:46 in the morning. The Bagamar on the surface suddenly stopped its erratic maneuvers. It sat dead in the water, 100 yards away. One of the Iranian sailors stood up. He held a signal flare in the air. He did not fire it. He waited. Inside the Fateh, the lights flickered. The sound of the American ship's hull was no longer a distant hum. It was a roar that filled the entire submarine. Reza looked at his crew. We are now one vessel. They cannot move without taking us with them. Now, we see who has the stronger nerves. The standoff had transitioned from a shadow game to a physical struggle. The Monterey was no longer just being followed. It was being hijacked from below. The situation was reaching a breaking point. One surge in engine power would crush the submarine. One emergency dive by the sub would tear the sonar dome off the cruiser. 9:50 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The vibration was no longer a sound. It was a physical weight that settled in the bones of every sailor on the bridge of the USS Monterey. The cruiser was displacing nearly 10,000 tons of water. The Iranian Fateh-class submarine was a fraction of that size. By wedging its sail against the sonar dome, the submarine had created a mechanical bond between the two vessels. If the Monterey increased speed to 20 knots, the sheer force of the water would likely snap the submarine's diving planes. If the submarine performed an emergency blow of its ballast tanks, it would punch a hole through the cruiser's thin hull plating. Commander Miller looked at the digital depth repeater. Status on the vertical separation. The officer of the deck checked his console. 0 meters. Sir, we are effectively a catamaran. Their hull is providing a small amount of lift to our bow. Our fuel efficiency is dropping as the drag increases. We are losing steering authority. This is the dead zone, Miller whispered to himself. He was right. Every weapon system on the Monterey was designed for a distance of at least 500 meters. The Mark 46 torpedoes would not arm. The 5-inch gun could not depress low enough to hit the water near the hull. Even the small arms teams on the deck were useless. They could not shoot through 50 feet of water and several inches of steel. The most advanced warship in the region had been neutralized by a pilot who was willing to scrape the paint off his own boat. 9:54 in the morning. Inside the Iranian submarine, Fateh, the noise was a physical assault. The sound of the Monterey's 4 massive gas turbine engines echoed through the pressure hull like a continuous thunderclap. Dust shook loose from the overhead pipes. The air was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen and hot hydraulic fluid. The Iranian crew sat in total silence. They were no longer operating a submarine. They were hanging onto the belly of a shark. Commander Reza watched the depth gauge. It was shivering. The pressure on the sail was immense. He knew that the American captain was a professional. He knew the Americans were trained to avoid escalation. He was betting his life and the lives of his 24 men on that single assumption. The diving officer looked at Reza. His eyes were wide. Commander, The structural alarms are sounding in the sail. The Americans are shifting their rudders. They are trying to shake us off. Reza gripped the back of the pilot's chair. Let them try. We have the suction of the hull on our side. Maintain upward pressure. 10% more on the diving planes. We will stay with them until they acknowledge our territorial claims. Sir, the officer stammered. The American ship is heavy. If they turn too hard, they will roll us over. Then we will roll together, Reza replied. 9:58 in the morning. The Combat Information Center. The tactical action officer was on a secure line with the admiral in Bahrain. The conversation was blunt. Sir, we are in a state of physical entanglement. We cannot deploy sonar. We cannot maneuver. The Boghummer on the surface is acting as a spotter. If we attempt to use divers or underwater charges, the Iranians will claim we attacked a submerged vessel in international waters. We are in a tactical stalemate with a 50% chance of accidental collision. The admiral's voice was distorted by the satellite link. Monterey. This is Fifth Fleet. You are authorized to use the ship's whistle and high-intensity sonar pulses to discourage the contact. Do not, I repeat, do not use kinetic force unless the submarine attempts to cycle its torpedo tubes. We are trying to reach Tehran through the diplomatic channel. Copy. Bahrain. But be advised, the submarine is not just following us. It is steering us. They are pushing our bow toward the Iranian coastline. We are 3 miles from the territorial limit. Miller returned to the bridge. They were being shoved toward a line in the sand. If the Monterey crossed into Iranian waters while physically attached to an Iranian submarine, the legal and political fallout would be irreversible. It would look like an invasion. The captain looked at his watch. 10 o'clock was approaching. The heat was rising. The tension was at the snapping point. Helmsman, Miller ordered, prepare for a full stop. If he wants to ride us, let us see how he likes the weight. 10:02 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The USS Monterey prepared to defy its own inertia. 10,000 tons of steel and 4 gas turbine engines were fighting a battle against momentum. Captain Miller stood at the center of the bridge. His feet were planted wide. His hands were locked on the edge of the navigation table. All engines. Stop bell. Emergency back full. Miller ordered. His voice was a flat line of ice. The response from the helm was instantaneous. Emergency back full. Aye, Captain. 10:02 and 30 seconds. The ship groaned. Deep in the hull. The transmission gears screamed as they reversed the pitch of the massive propellers. The vibration changed from a low hum to a violent and bone-shaking shudder. Outside, the ocean, at the stern, exploded into a white mountain of foam and boiling salt water. The Monterey began to bleed speed. 12 knots, 10 knots, 8 knots, 10:03 in the morning. Inside the Iranian submarine Fateh, the world tilted. Commander Reza was thrown forward against the periscope stand. The sudden deceleration of the American cruiser above them acted like a physical wall. The submarine, still carrying forward momentum, began to slide along the Monterey's belly. It was like a car sliding under a truck. The sound was deafening. The reversed screws of the Monterey were now creating a massive turbulence of air and water. Cavitation bubbles popped against the Fateh's hull like thousands of hammer blows. Reza shouted over the noise. Emergency deep, blow the safety tank, now. The diving officer struggled with the controls. Commander, the suction is holding us. We are being dragged back by their wake. We are sliding toward their propellers. 10:03 and 45 seconds. The Combat Information Center. The sonar supervisor's headset was vibrating with the sound of tearing metal. Captain, Sierra 9-2 is sliding forward. They are clearing the keel, but they are heading straight for the sonar dome. Impact in 10 seconds. 9, 8. Miller did not blink. Hold course. Maintain emergency back. The sonar dome was a bulbous, sensitive structure at the very front of the ship. It contained the most advanced acoustic sensors in the world. If the submarine hit it at this speed, the dome would shatter. The Monterey would be blind. The submarine would likely be crushed. 10:04 in the morning. The bridge. The vibration reached a crescendo. A high-pitched scream of titanium on steel echoed through the deck plates. The Monterey shuddered, as if it had hit a reef. Every sailor on the bridge was thrown toward the forward windows. The helmsman fought the wheel. "Captain, we have heavy impact at the bow. The ship is pitching down." 10:04 and 30 seconds. Inside the Fateh, the lights went out. Red emergency lamps flickered on. The hull groaned. A seam in the forward torpedo room began to spray, a fine mist of high-pressure seawater. "Seal the compartment," Reza yelled. "Report depth." 40 meters and falling, the diving officer cried. "The American ship is pushing us down." The Monterey was literally riding over the top of the submarine. The weight of the cruiser was forcing the smaller vessel into the seabed. The water depth was only 60 meters. In less than a minute, both ships would be aground. 10:05 in the morning. The sonar supervisor's voice was a whisper. "Captain, the contact is wedged. We are moving as one mass. Speed is 0. We are dead in the water." The two vessels were locked together in a violent, metallic embrace. The silence that followed the roar of the engines was more terrifying than the noise. The ocean around them was a chaotic mess of bubbles and silt. The boghammer on the surface moved closer. It was now 50 yards away. The Iranian sailor, with the flare gun, raised his arm. He looked directly at the bridge of the Monterey. He was waiting for the signal to start a war, with the smell of scorched hydraulic fluid. Miller looked at the radar. He looked at the sonar. He looked at the man with the flare. 10:10 in the morning. The center of the shipping channel. The silence on the bridge of the USS Monterey was absolute. It was the silence of a heart stopping. The cruiser was dead in the water. Beneath the bow, the Fateh-class submarine was a trapped weight. Both vessels were pinned together by the physical forces of the ocean and the damage to their hulls. They were a single, broken object, drifting in one of the busiest waterways on Earth. Commander Miller looked at the surface search radar. A massive new contact had appeared. It was not a military vessel. It was the Al-Zubarah. It was a Q-Max liquefied natural gas tanker. It was nearly 400 meters long. It carried 300,000 tons of highly volatile cargo, and it was traveling at 17 knots on a direct heading for the Monterey's port side. The officer of the deck's voice was hollow. "Captain, the tanker is at 4,000 yards. They are in the deep water channel. They cannot maneuver. If they hit us, the impact will trigger a fuel-air explosion that will level everything within 5 miles." The pivot had arrived. The geopolitical chess match had been interrupted by the reality of global commerce. The Al-Zubarah was a moving mountain of steel. The geopolitical chess match had been interrupted by the reality of global commerce. It did not care about territorial claims or tactical standoffs. It only followed the laws of physics and momentum. Miller keyed the bridge-to-bridge radio. "Al-Zubarah, this is USS Monterey. We are dead in the water. We are unable to maneuver. You must alter course immediately. Brake, brake, brake." The response was a blast from the tanker's horn. It was a sound so deep it made the glass in the bridge windows rattle. 5 seconds of pure, low-frequency warning. The tanker was telling the world it could not stop. Inside the Iranian submarine Fateh, Commander Reza felt the vibration of the tanker's massive engines. It was different from the high-pitched whine of the cruiser. This was a heavy, rhythmic thrumming that shook the very air in the cabin. The diving officer looked at the sonar display. "Commander, the surface contact is massive. It is creating a pressure wave ahead of its bow. If that wave hits us while we are pinned to the American ship, it will roll us under their keel. We will be crushed like a tin can." Reza realized the trap had become a coffin. He looked at the leak in the forward torpedo room. The spray was getting stronger. The pressure from the Monterey was forcing the submarine deeper into the silt. The Iranian commander grabbed the internal radio. "Blow all tanks. Full emergency power. We must break the suction, or we die with the Americans." 10:13 in the morning. On the surface, the Boghamar pilot saw the wall of the tanker's bow approaching. It looked like a skyscraper moving through the water. The Iranian sailor dropped his flare gun. He grabbed the throttles of his boat and turned away at full speed. He was no longer a combatant. He was a survivor. Commander Miller watched the distance close. 3,000 yards, 2,000 yards. The Al-Zubarah was a wall of red and black steel that filled the entire horizon. "Sonar!" Miller shouted. "Is the sub moving?" The supervisor's voice came through the speakers. "They are blowing ballast, sir. I hear high-pressure air. They are trying to back out, but the hulls are still grinding. We are dragging them with us." The tanker was 90 seconds away. The bow wave of the Al-Zubarah reached the Monterey. The cruiser began to lift and roll. The physical bond between the ship and the submarine groaned. It was a sound of screaming metal that could be heard through the decks. Then, there was a sharp, explosive crack. The Monterey lurched violently to the starboard side. The submarine had broken free, but it had not dived. The Fateh popped to the surface like a cork. It was covered in gray anti-fouling paint and jagged scars from the cruiser's hull. It sat paralyzed in the water, directly in the path of the tanker. Both engines. "Full ahead!" Miller roared. "Clear the channel!" The standoff was over. The race for survival had begun. 10:20 in the morning, the Persian Gulf. The ocean was no longer a battlefield. It was a chaotic construction site of noise and displacement. The Al-Zubarah was less than 800 meters away. Its bulbous bow pushed a wall of water 3 stories high. For the sonar team on the USS Monterey, the world had gone black. The acoustic signature of the tanker's massive 7-bladed propeller was so loud, it washed out every other sound in the sea. This was the acoustic blackout, the blind man's bluff. Commander Miller looked back at the Fateh. The Iranian submarine was wallowing in the swells. It was sitting low in the water. Its sail was bent. A dark trail of hydraulic fluid leaked from its side. It looked like a wounded whale. "They are not diving," the officer of the deck shouted. "They have no power." Miller's jaw tightened. If that tanker hits them, the Fateh will be dragged under the Al-Zubarah's keel. The submarine's compressed air flasks will explode. It could rupture the tanker's inner hull. The captain knew the math. 300,000 tons of liquid natural gas. If the containment failed, the resulting cloud would ignite. It would be the largest non-nuclear explosion in history. The Monterey was far enough away to survive the impact, but the Iranian crew was not. "Helmsman, hard to port," Miller ordered. "We are going to use our wake to push them." 10:23 in the morning. Inside the Iranian submarine, Fateh. Commander Reza was standing in knee-deep water in the control room. The air was thick with the smell of chlorine gas. The batteries were leaking. Every man was wearing an emergency oxygen mask. The sound of the Al-Zubarah was like a freight train passing through their skulls. The diving officer looked at Reza. His eyes were red from the fumes. "The engines will not start. The shaft is bent. We are drifting into the tanker's path." Reza looked at the small porthole in the sail. He saw the red wall of the tanker. It blocked out the sun. He expected the Americans to be gone. He expected them to be miles away. Instead, he saw the gray hull of the Monterey turning. The American cruiser was leaning hard into a high-speed turn. It was crossing the tanker's bow at a dangerous angle. "What are they doing?" the junior officer wheezed. Reza watched the Monterey's stern. The 4 massive propellers were throwing up a mountain of white water. "They are creating a wash. They are trying to move us." 10:25 in the morning. The Monterey's wake hit the Fateh like a physical blow. The Iranian sailors were thrown against the bulkheads, but the force of the water worked. The submarine was shoved 20 meters to the side. It was just enough. The Al-Zubarah surged past. The tanker was so close that the Monterey's bridge crew could see the rivets on its hull. The wind from the tanker's passage whistled through the cruiser's antennas. The giant ship moved through the space where the submarine had been seconds before. The roar of the tanker's engines began to fade. The acoustic blackout lifted. The Monterey slowed. It sat 500 yards from the crippled Fateh. The Bagamar had returned. It circled the submarine. It was picking up sailors who had jumped into the water during the impact. Commander Miller picked up the bridge-to-bridge radio. He switched to the international hailing frequency. "Iranian vessel. This is USS Monterey. Do you require assistance? There was a long silence. Only the sound of the wind and the distant throb of the tanker filled the air. Then, the radio crackled. A voice spoke in accented English. Monterey, this is Fateh. We have regained primary buoyancy. We do not require your help. But we acknowledge the maneuver. There was no thank you. There was no apology. There was only a professional recognition of a life saved. Miller put the handset down. Status of the sonar dome. The tactical action officer looked at his screen. It is compromised, sir. We have lost 30% of our sensitivity. We are effectively deaf in the forward sector. Understood, Miller said. Keep our guns trained on the Baghamar. We are not leaving until that submarine is under tow. We will maintain our position. The immediate crisis had passed. The explosion had been avoided. But the two nations were still staring at each other over the barrels of loaded guns. 10:45 in the morning. The edge of the Iranian territorial waters. The USS Monterey sat heavy in the water. The massive wake of the Al-Zubarah had finally dissipated, leaving the Gulf in a state of deceptive calm. The cruiser was no longer moving at high speed. It was station-keeping. Its bow pointed toward the open sea, but its sensors remained locked on the wounded Fateh-class submarine. The distance between the two vessels had grown to 800 yards. It was a safe distance for navigation, but a lethal distance for modern missiles. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tension had shifted from panic to a cold, calculated readiness. The tactical action officer watched the digital display. The red icon of the submarine was no longer overlapping the blue icon of the cruiser. They were two distinct entities again. The sonar supervisor spoke into his headset. Captain, the Fateh is on the surface. We are picking up heavy cavitation from their secondary propulsion. They are trying to move under their own power. But the shaft is clearly out of alignment. We are also detecting multiple high-speed surface contacts approaching from the north. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy. Miller stood by the master tactical console. Identify the contacts. 6 Baghamars and 2 Haudong-class missile boats. Sir, they are coming in fast. 30 knots. They will be on us in 5 minutes. 10:51 in the morning. On the bridge of the Fateh, Commander Reza had climbed out of the hatch and stood on the jagged metal of the bridge sail. The salt air felt cold against his skin, which was still slick with the sweat of the engine room. He looked back at the USS Monterey. The American ship looked like a gray mountain against the horizon. He could see the sunlight glinting off the barrels of its 5-inch gun. He knew that the American captain had every reason to fire. He had violated their space. He had physically struck their hull. Reza raised his binoculars. He saw a figure on the Monterey's bridge wing doing the same. For a brief second, through the lenses of high-powered optics, 2 men from 2 different worlds looked at each other across 800 yards of contested water. There was no salute. There was no wave. There was only a mutual understanding of how close they had both come to vanishing into the deep. A junior officer climbed up behind him. Commander, the missile boats are signaling. They want to know if they should engage the Monterey to cover our retreat. Reza did not take his eyes off the cruiser. Tell them to stand down. The Americans had the chance to let the tanker hit us. They chose to use their wake to push us clear. If we fire now, we are the ones without honor. Signal the tow. We are going home. 11:02 in the morning. The Iranian missile boats arrived. They did not attack. They formed a defensive screen around the crippled submarine. A large ocean-going tug followed behind them. Lines were thrown, and the Fateh was slowly turned toward the naval base at Bandar Abbas, on the bridge of the Monterey. Commander Miller watched the procession. He felt a strange lack of triumph. His ship was damaged. His primary sonar was crippled. He would have to explain to the admiral why he allowed an enemy submarine to get close enough to touch his keel. The officer of the deck looked at the captain. They are leaving. Sir, should we resume our transit? Miller shook his head. We stay until they are in territorial waters. I want no misunderstandings, no accidents. If one of those small boats gets nervous and fires a rocket, this whole thing starts again. The captain keyed the ship's internal circuit. This is the captain. All hands. We are standing down from general quarters. Revert to condition 3. Secure the small arms teams. Damage control parties. Report to the forward sonar trunk. I want a full assessment of the dome before we put any more strain on the engines. The immediate threat of war had receded. Like the tide, the adrenaline began to pull away, leaving only the exhaustion of a 3-hour standoff that had felt like 3 years. 11:15 in the morning. The gap between the American ship and the Iranian flotilla widened. The cruiser moved to the south toward the deep, blue safety of the open ocean. The submarine moved north toward the jagged rocks of the coastline. The sea between them was empty once more. The crisis had fully resolved. But as the Monterey turned toward the horizon, Miller knew that the rules of the Gulf had changed forever. 11:15 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The USS Monterey moved south at a steady 5 knots. The vibration from the engine room was different now. It was a heavy, unbalanced thrumming that resonated through the deck plates. The damage to the forward sonar dome had changed the hydrodynamics of the ship. Every 100 meters, the cruiser pushed against the wall of its own displaced water. The ocean was quiet. The Iranian flotilla was now 2 miles to the north, and the gap was widening with every minute. Inside the Combat Information Center, the high-pitched tension of the morning had been replaced by a quiet, professional exhaustion. The blue lights of the consoles seemed dimmer. The air felt heavy with the scent of ozone and recycled air. The tactical action officer looked at the captain. "Sir, we have cleared the traffic separation scheme. We are in deep water. Depth is 200 meters and increasing." Commander Miller nodded. He did not sit down. "What is the status of the forward sonar trunk?" The sonar supervisor responded over the internal line. "Captain, the trunk is dry, but the internal sensors in the dome are showing multiple faults. We have lost the high-frequency array. The physical impact from the Fateh's sail caused a structural deformation of the outer skin. We are blind to anything dead ahead of us for the next 3 miles." "Understood," Miller said. "Maintain a zigzag course. I want the towed array sonar deployed as soon as we hit 10 knots. We will use our ears in the back to cover the hole in the front." 11:30 in the morning. On the deck of the Iranian tugboat, Commander Reza stood at the stern. He watched the thick steel cable that connected the tug to his submarine. The Fateh looked small and broken in the water. Its bow was pitched down, and the gray paint of its hull was marred by long, bright streaks of American steel. The Iranian sailors on the deck of the tug were silent. There was no celebration of their survival. They were professional mariners, and they knew how close they had come to the end. A Revolutionary Guard officer from one of the missile boats stepped onto the tug. He looked at the receding silhouette of the USS Monterey. "The Americans are retreating," he said. "They are damaged." Reza did not look at him. "They are not retreating. They are moving to clear water. They saved our lives when that tanker approached. Never forget that. They could have let the ocean do their work for them, and they chose not to." The officer frowned. "They were in our waters." "The lines on the map do not matter when 300,000 tons of gas are about to explode," Reza replied. "Today, the Americans were sailors first and soldiers second. We should be grateful for the distinction." 11:45 in the morning. The bridge of the USS Monterey. The officer of the deck checked the radar. "Captain, the Iranian contacts have crossed the 12-mile limit. They are in territorial waters. The Fateh is under tow. They are no longer a factor." Miller let out a long, slow breath. He felt the weight of the last 3 hours settle into his shoulders. "Very well. Set the ship to condition 4. Secure the damage control parties. We are proceeding to Bahrain for a full pier-side assessment." "Sir," the officer asked, "what do we put in the log?" Miller looked out at the horizon. The sun was high now, turning the Gulf into a brilliant, empty blue. The truth. We encountered a vertical threat. We maintained station, and we avoided a regional disaster through professional restraint. Mention the submarine by name. The Fateh. They were good. Tell the analysts they were very good. There was no cheering on the Monterey. There was no sense of a mission accomplished. There was only the quiet relief of 400 men who were still breathing. The cruiser continued its slow, limping journey toward the south. The immediate crisis had fully resolved. The guns were cold. The missiles remained in their cells. The ocean was a place of business once again. 2:15 in the afternoon. Mina Salman Pier, Bahrain. The USS Monterey moved slowly toward its berth. A team of Navy divers waited on the concrete pier. They were equipped with high-resolution underwater cameras and ultrasonic testing gear. As the cruiser drew closer, the damage became visible to the naked eye. The smooth, rounded shape of the forward sonar dome was no longer perfect. It bore a jagged, silver scar nearly 6 meters long, where the sail of the Iranian submarine had ground into the composite skin. It was a physical record of a standoff that had nearly changed the course of the century. 3 days later, the headquarters of the United States Fifth Fleet. The conference room was windowless and chilled by high-powered air conditioning. A dozen senior officers sat around a mahogany table. They were listening to a sound that had been cleaned of all background noise by digital filters. It was a rhythmic, metallic clicking followed by a long, screeching groan of steel on steel. An intelligence analyst stood by a large screen. This is the acoustic data from the moment of initial contact. Our assessment has changed. The Fateh-class boat did not just happen to find the Monterey in the shipping lane. They were testing a new variant of a high-torque electric motor. This system allows for near instantaneous changes in propeller pitch. That is how they matched the cruiser's maneuvers so perfectly. They were not just shadowing us. They were slaved to us. The admiral leaned forward. His eyes were fixed on the waveform on the screen. They were using our own acoustic energy as a physical shield. It was a sophisticated gamble. If the Monterey had increased speed by even 3 knots during that entanglement, the pressure differential would have imploded. The Iranian boat. They were betting their lives on our captain's restraint. The analyst nodded. They knew our rules of engagement better than we did, sir. They turned our own professionalism into a tactical weakness. They knew we would not risk a collision until it was almost too late. In Tehran, the narrative was different. The state media released a grainy video taken from the Bagamar. It showed the USS Monterey looming, like a gray ghost over the tiny Iranian submarine. The headline described it as a victory of Persian resolve over American technology. But inside the Iranian Naval Command at Bandar Abbas, the mood was more sober. Commander Reza was not hailed as a hero. He was questioned for 10 hours about why he allowed his vessel to become physically pinned. Both sides understood the unspoken truth. They had both survived because of a series of split-second human decisions, not because of their machines. The strategic fallout was immediate. The United States Navy issued a new directive for all vessels transiting the strait. No cruiser or destroyer would travel through the Narrows without a dedicated anti-submarine helicopter in the air at all times. The vertical threat was no longer a theoretical exercise. It was a documented reality. The dead zone, directly beneath a ship's keel, was now officially recognized as the most dangerous place in the Persian Gulf. Commander Miller sat in his temporary office in Bahrain. He looked at the damage report on his desk. His career was safe, but his perspective had shifted. He realized that the oceans were getting smaller. The technology that was supposed to keep his crew safe at a distance of 50 miles had been bypassed by a man with a compass and a reckless amount of courage. The military analysis was clear. Modern warfare was no longer just about who had the biggest radar or the fastest missiles. It was about who could occupy the smallest spaces. The shadow of the Fateh would haunt the sonar rooms of the fleet for years to come. It was a reminder that in the age of digital war, the most dangerous weapon was still a human being who was not afraid to die. 1 week later, Washington, D.C. and the Persian Gulf. The incident was officially logged as a close-quarters navigational hazard. In the classified briefings at the Pentagon, it was referred to as the vertical shadow. The strategic assessment concluded that The Iranian Navy had successfully demonstrated a new doctrine of asymmetrical warfare. They had proven that a billion-dollar cruiser could be neutralized not by a missile, but by a simple physical presence in a blind spot. The technology of the 21st century had been defeated by the tactics of the ancient world. The report was blunt. It stated that if Commander Miller had chosen to engage the surface craft, the resulting shockwave would have killed every man on the Iranian submarine. It also stated that if Commander Reza had chosen to fire a torpedo at point-blank range, the USS Monterey would now be sitting on the floor of the Strait of Hormuz. Both men had held the power to start a global conflict in the palms of their hands, and both men had chosen to wait. Military analysts would spend months dissecting the acoustic tapes. They would study the way the hulls ground together. They would analyze the frequency of the Iranian electric motors. They would upgrade the sonar software on every ship in the fleet to better detect a target directly beneath the keel. But no amount of software could account for the human element. The machines had provided the data, but the men had provided the restraint. The military commander stood on the deck of a transport plane, heading back to the United States for a debriefing that would last for weeks. He looked down at the blue water of the Gulf from 30,000 feet. It looked peaceful. It looked like a map. From this height, you could not see the jagged scars on the steel or the oil on the water. You could not hear the sound of a submarine sail grinding against a sonar dome 5,000 miles away. In a quiet hospital in Tehran, Commander Reza sat by a window. He was being treated for the chlorine gas he had inhaled during the final moments of the standoff. He watched the city traffic below. It moved in a chaotic, rhythmic flow, much like the shipping lanes of the Gulf. He knew that his career as a submarine commander was likely over. The Fateh would be in dry dock for a year, and his superiors were already looking for someone to blame for the physical damage to the boat. Reza did not mind. He was alive. His crew was alive. He thought about the American captain. He wondered if the man was sleeping any better than he was. They were two men from two different worlds, separated by religion, politics, and history. But they were linked by a single Banday morning of shared terror. They had stared into the abyss together, and they had both stepped back from the edge. The Persian Gulf returned to its normal state. The tankers continued their slow procession. The fighter jets continued their high-altitude patrols. The ocean was deep, and it was wide. But for 3 hours, it had been as narrow as a human heart. The world had moved on, but the memory of the vertical shadow remained. Modern warfare is often described as a series of calculations and technical advantages. It is measured in range, speed, and firepower. But the lesson of the Monterey and the Fateh was different. It was a reminder that the most advanced weapons are still controlled by the human spirit. The most important decisions are not made by computers in a bunker, but by individuals in the dark. No missiles flew, no ships were lost, but history shifted. When the line was crossed, both sides chose restraint. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. The morning was finally dead. Still, the silent war had ended without a single shot.